Well, welcome back. We are focused on China as the U.S. and China continue talking about a deal. Texas Senator Ted Cruz penning a new op-ed this morning in USA Today, detailing censorship by the Chinese government. Cruz is fresh off of a visit to Hong Kong amid the ongoing protests and NBA backlash. Cruz, in his op-ed this morning, writes this: "For too long, China has been allowed to carry out its tyrannical actions in the dark of night. The Chinese Communist Party has used coercion and blackmail to buy silence, not just from the NBA, which receives billions of dollars from the country, but also from industry empires like Apple and Google and Nike." Joining me right now in a Fox Business exclusive, live from Capitol Hill, in his first interview since his Asia tour concluded, is Senate Judiciary Committee member, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. And Senator, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for being here this morning.
Good morning, Maria. It's good to be with you.
Look, I love this op-ed, and I love the fact that you began the piece talking about Jackie Robinson, the great Jackie Robinson. Tell us about it.
Well, sure. You look, when Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball, I mean, he wasn't simply playing a game. He was changing culture. He was changing society. He was breaking down barriers. And sports have enabled people to do that. Our leagues, a league like the NBA, is a global league. They have power. They have prestige. And it's why seeing what happened in the last couple of weeks was so dismaying. I mean, it all started from a simple tweet from Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, where he said, "Stand for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." A benign tweet that virtually every American, that freedom-loving people across the world agree with. And China lost their mind. They immediately responded by banning the Houston Rockets from television in China, banning them from internet broadcast in China, stripping their sponsorships, and demanding that the NBA take action. And I'll tell you, it was sad. The NBA responded with this groveling apology. Not only that, Nike pulled down all the Rockets products from their outlets in China, and it isn't right that U.S. companies, and in particular that a global sports league, should be able to be dragooned into being censors for the Chinese communists. They are afraid of free speech, and unfortunately, too many American companies are willing to help them be insulated from free speech.
Well, I mean, what are the broader implications of this, Senator? Because I agree that for far too long, American companies have been more interested in getting their products in front of 1.4 billion people in China, making money on those people, regardless of what's going on. They've got facial recognition. They're tracking all their citizens and then coming up with a score at the end of the year. And if they don't like the way you've lived, like maybe you smoke, maybe you do something that they don't like, then you'll get a demerit, and you will maybe not be able to get on a train, not be able to travel. So all these companies were so willing to get their product in front of the 1.4 billion people, they forgot to protect it. They forgot about all of the human abuses.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And listen, the trade we have with China is important. But, one of the big arguments when we opened up that trade to begin with was China, is we said, well, if we engage in commerce with China, we'll export our values. We'll bring the values of freedom and democracy to China. We need to make sure that we're not importing their values, the values of censorship and totalitarianism. And I understand it's a whole lot of money. I mean, that led to the rather sad moment last week where you had LeBron James going out and defending the Chinese communists, defending and saying, well, Daryl Morey, he didn't understand. He didn't understand what's going on. Look, the only thing that the NBA is understanding right now is they want to make a lot of bucks by selling a lot of sneakers. But China routinely tortures and murders its citizens. There are hundreds of thousands, nearly 1 million Uyghurs, Muslims in China, who are imprisoned in concentration camps. You look at what they're doing to Tibet. And by the way, China won't even allow you to say the word Tibet. They're so terrified of the people in Tibet who want freedom. It's so bad that the movie Doctor Strange, they changed the ancient one, which in the comic book is Tibetan. They changed them instead to Celtic because they didn't want to offend the Chinese Communist government. We shouldn't have Hollywood acting as the censors for totalitarian regimes.
Well, you can't Google Tiananmen Square and get the truth. And now Google has an AI lab in Beijing, but it walked away from working with the Pentagon. All of the things you just mentioned is the reason that I keep bringing up this quote that Xi Jinping made last month when he was with the Prime Minister of Nepal, and he said, "Any attempt to split China will end in crushed bodies and shattered bones." I mean, this is the president of China. He's telling you who he is. The president has changed the conversation on this situation. You're just back from Hong Kong and saw things firsthand. Tell us what's going on in Hong Kong, because we had Jimmy Lai on a number of times, activist, dissident from China, and he says that everything changed in Hong Kong when Xi Jinping got to power, and it was clear that he was dictator for life. What did you see while on the ground?
Well, Jimmy Lai is terrific. He was one of the folks I met with, and as you noted, I was on an Asia Pacific tour where I went to Japan, I went to Taiwan, I went to India, and then I went to Hong Kong. And the entire trip started out by going to Pearl Harbor and meeting with the Indo-Pacific Command and the Pacific Fleet. Started with a military briefing on the military threats posed by China, which are massive and growing. They are investing enormous amounts in modernizing the military. By the way, they're doing it in significant part with intellectual property they've stolen by us, because it's a state policy to steal intellectual property. And in traveling to each of those countries, that was really envisioned as a friends and allies tour. Each of those are countries we have strong alliances with, and each of them are dealing very directly with Chinese increased military aggressiveness, economic aggressiveness. Hong Kong in particular, what's happening in Hong Kong is incredible. I mean, we've seen over 2 million people come to the streets protesting for freedom, protesting for democracy, and it's amazing to see them holding up quotes from the American founding fathers. I mean, the people of Hong Kong, they've enjoyed economic prosperity when they were part of Great Britain, and when they returned to China, China entered an international treaty commitment to protect their autonomy, to protect their political rights, and right now the Chinese government is trying to stomp them underfoot. And I'll tell you, everyone else in the region is watching very carefully what happens in China. The folks in Taiwan are very nervous about what happens in Hong Kong, because if they can do it there, they're going to keep trying to do it elsewhere as well.
And that was the whole point of Hong Kong and this experiment to, Hong Kongers thought, well, maybe we can convince China that freedom works, that democracy works to become a vibrant place to do business. And for a long time, Hong Kong has been seen as this vibrant hub for international business. I don't know that I see it that way anymore, given China's authoritarian hand. Do you? And I want you to talk to us about what you want Congress to do, because you're calling on Congress to pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and for it to be signed into law by President Trump.
We lost last week.
Senator Cruz, are you with us? The congressional moves are going to be so important in terms of what happens next and how tough America can be versus China in this trade deal. So what I want to hear from Senator Cruz is what he would like to see in terms of a potential deal. Tell me, Senator, what you want Congress to do, and then what you want a deal to look like with President Trump.
Well, with regard to a trade deal, I hope we get a trade deal. I hope it's a good trade deal. If you look at trade, China has long been very unfair in how they treat the United States. Every year, China exports to the U.S. about $500 billion worth of goods. At the same time, every year, we export to them about $100 billion of goods. So it's a 5-to-1 differential. And the reason for this is they have a myriad of non-tariff barriers. It's incredibly difficult to sell our goods and services into China. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I met with the senior leadership of John Deere and was talking about tractors. And they talked about how unbelievably difficult it is to sell a tractor in China, because they have very technical specifications for what the tractor has to do. And when they go and design a tractor to meet those specifications, they change the specifications, so wonder of wonders, only a Chinese tractor will meet them. That's the sort of games they play routinely. And I will say I applaud President Trump for leaning in hard on China to try to tear down those barriers. I think opening up that market to more goods and services, I think that would be a very positive development.
Yeah, I mean,
at the same time.
Go ahead, sir. Well, there were reports that the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, is going to serve as chairman of the board of its Chinese economic school for the next 3 years. He's reportedly been on the board in the past. So has Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. So, companies are trying to do what they can do to stay in good stead with the Chinese leadership.
Well, they are. And look, if Tim Cook does business in China, I think that's fine. That can be good for America. But he needs to make sure that Apple doesn't obey the whims of the Chinese dictatorship. I was very disappointed when Apple pulled down from their app the Taiwanese flag. So in Hong Kong, suddenly you couldn't find the Taiwanese flag. They pulled it down because their Chinese masters demanded it. They also pulled down an app that the Hong Kong protesters were using to come together and organize, and they pulled it down again, presumably at the behest of the Chinese government. It's one thing to do business with them, but if American companies are willing to be participants in the suppression of human rights and the suppression of free speech, that is a much more troubling line to cross.
So you want to see congressional action here in terms of the Hong Kong protesters. What do you want to see out of Congress in terms of this Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act?
Well, I'm a co-sponsor of the Human Rights and Democracy Act. Just a few weeks ago, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, on which I serve, we unanimously passed the bill. It was a bipartisan bill. Every Democrat, every Republican came together and passed it. I hope that the Senate takes up soon, ideally this week, the Human Rights and Democracy Act, that we pass it, and we pass it into law, because it's powerful to stand with the protesters in Hong Kong and to say the American people support you, support freedom. When I was in Hong Kong, I got a chance to sit down with a number of the protest leaders and democracy activists and encourage them and say, look, the eyes of the world are on you. And one of the things I encouraged them also, I said, follow the pattern of Gandhi, of Dr. Martin Luther King. Follow the pattern of nonviolence. The Chinese government wants to turn these into violent clashes because that's how they delegitimize you. And so use the power of the values you're fighting for to command the attention of the world. And I hope that's the path they continue to go down.
I mean, the bullying is just disgusting. Senator, real quick before you go, on your way out, this impeachment inquiry, Democrats blocking the House Republican effort to censor Intel Chairman Adam Schiff over the handling of this investigation. How do you think this plays out in terms of impeachment, sir?
Well, listen, I think the House right now has turned into a partisan circus. I think the House Democrats, they don't care about the facts. They simply want to impeach the president. They've wanted to impeach him since November 2016, since he got elected. They're mad at the American people for electing him. And watching the House now reminds me of the famous line from Alice in Wonderland: verdict first, trial later. I mean, that's their attitude. They've convicted him already. And if you look at the process, they're not allowing minority participation. They're not allowing it to be public. They're not allowing minority witnesses to be called. They're not following the precedents of the House of Representatives to protect basic due process. And I think if we just watch a political show, that at the end of the day is not good for the country.
Yeah, I said it earlier. They've got their guy. Now they just have to find the crime. Senator, it's great to see you. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks, Maria.
We'll see you